Right, so I just finished getting this set up. So I'm at St Thomas Pleasure Grounds in Exeter, and it's the 19th of February, and it's, like I say, the day after we've just had the storm that has wreaked havoc across the UK. Now, as you can see, this lovely Monterey pine unfortunately has suffered some damage, and you'll see shortly as I get closer to the left side of the tree. So as I said, this is a Monterey pine. It's a non-native species of the UK. The only truly native pine is Scots pine, and Monterey pine, its scientific name is Pinus radiata, sorry, I said that wrong. So we'll have a close-up of some of the damage, bearing in mind that, like I say, two of the major limbs have unfortunately been severed from the tree due to the high wind, and you can see most of the lower part is now blocking this footpath. So I'd imagine the parks team will probably, during the half term, which is next week, they will come along and remove the limbs, and then like I say, they'll probably turn this into chippings. But let's focus on the tree. So I've studied this tree quite a lot at St Thomas Pleasure Grounds. Lovely tree. Real shame to see such damage. And like I say, you can see this is a complete snap of one of its lower limbs. And I'll move to the other side so you can actually see properly, but you can see that clean break. And what I've got to be very mindful of is that there's also another, and this is actually even larger limb near the middle of the canopy, that surprisingly that also was taken clean off by the storm. And currently that huge limb branch is currently resting on a smaller one, so that is going to put stress on that lower branch. So hopefully the parks team will remove that, otherwise I'll have to start removing more of the tree to keep it safe. So we'll go around the other side in a moment and we'll talk about this particular tree. So at this time of the year, February, of course, we always, in the UK, storms and high winds, it's not uncommon. This particular one is quite a big one. But in February, Monterey pines are beginning their pollen production. So we're actually at the early stages of seeing this tree beginning to produce billions and billions of pollen grains in the male flowers. So we will talk about that, as we're lucky enough that we can actually get very close to the flowers and cones and other parts of the tree that you wouldn't normally be able to. You can now see more of the damage. So as I said, you can see here is where that's come down, and then if we move further up, you can, it's difficult, but you can see where this whole section has sort of come clean off, fallen here, and is now resting on, there's actually two branches, sorry, not one, and that is a huge branch, and you can already see in here that the tree is beginning to heal its damage by producing various resin and other types of sealing liquids, which is not uncommon for pines. They're very sticky. I imagine that when the parks team removes all the brush and branches, etc., they'll probably cleanly cut anything poking out, because although that's not, to be honest, that's quite high, but they probably won't want to take any any risks there. So anyway, Monterey pine, not native to this country, California from memory, and it is an endangered tree species, so we want to see as many of these guys in the UK do as well as they can, and it's a beautiful tree. and you can already notice those huge cones. Now we're quite lucky that because usually the female flowers which turn into those massive cones are typically growing clusters of 4 to 5, and you can actually see them in like rings around the branches as they go outwards. Now the problem with that is because of the way the pine tree grows, although you can see all these lovely tall closer, all these which is full of pollen, these are the male cones, and as you can see they are plentiful. They are billions and billions of male pollen stored in those little cones. What we're looking for is the female ones, which is a numbers game. You will have many, many more male cones compared to female cones, but again, because they grow towards the end of the branch and the branches go upwards, it's harder to actually sometimes see the female flowers and the female cones. Now, as I said, making the best of this rather bad situation for this lovely tree, we can get a closer look at cones, or the female parts of the tree, that we wouldn't normally be able to get to see. So you can already see amongst this jumble of leaves and cones and branches, these are your cones of a Monterey pine. So these are fully mature cones, and as you can see, they grow like in a ring around it, and you will normally get, from my experience, a bit like when you look at the branches, you normally get, I'd say, between 4 to 5 of these cones that grow at an angle around the parts of the branch. Now, they might not look it. Trying to remove these cones before the tree decides so, it takes a lot of strength. These are on like super glue. These are very tough to remove. Now, as you were to go upwards on the branch, you would actually see that the different stages of the female cones. So this, as I say, is fully mature. And we're quite lucky that you can actually see a small one here. So basically, unfortunately, we're a little bit too early for the female flowers to show, because at this time of the year, this tree is putting all its energy and resources at the moment into making flowers, and it's the male flowers that are ready first, and it won't be long until all these will open up and they will release a lot of pollen in the air. So unfortunately, if you are sensitive to pollen, in the next few weeks, Monterey pines will be shedding it a lot. Now, like I said, the job of the male flowers is to release all this male pollen into the air, and then basically to get onto the female flowers. Now, as I said, unfortunately, it's not quite right to see the female flowers, which are almost like these pinkish red, small miniature versions of that. And the reason why it's also quite difficult is, unlike the male cones where there's plenty to choose from, there's not a shortage at all. The female cones, typically, or the flowers that we want to look at, will grow at the very sort of tips of the branches, and again, they're normally out of the reach unless you're a very tall person. Now, unfortunately, because of the damage, I think some of it's sort of like broken off, but I did look for some female flowers, but I've not had much luck. But this is what you'd be looking for, and I think here is one of the 4 or 5 female flowers that would begin to get ready. But as I said, I think there's been so much, when the wind has probably damaged a lot of the tips of the branch as well. That's what you'd normally see in the centre, and then that's where you get your 4 or 5 small female cones. And again, as the tree gets older and older and puts on more growth, this small branch now, in a few years, would then become a bigger branch, and then those tiny small female cones, or flowers at the time, will then get bigger and bigger, and it takes years until they get to that really big size. So if we're lucky, here we are, more female cones. Better. You want to see that ring? Stick this away because the needles are in the way. So you can see one has snapped off here, but there would have been 5, which is normal. So 4 to 5 is what I usually see, and this is good. So this is, as I said, towards the end of the branch, and then you've got the younger ones, larger ones. Again, loads of male cones. We'll have a proper close look at them. And the other thing you'll find with Monterey pine, which is slightly different from most, well, I say most pines, but pines that we know of. Now that's not a very good example. This one is though. The needle clusters are in groups of 3. There's not many pine trees that really do that. Most of them tend to be 2 or 5 or even more. So actually identifying Monterey pines is one of the easier pine trees to go for. And also the cones, because they're so distinct, when you actually look at them, you can see they're not like your typical, they could grow at an angle, making it much easier to identify. So we've covered quite a bit of useful information about this fantastic pine tree. Again, regards to flowering, like with nearly all, well, as far as I'm aware, all pine trees, they are monoecious, which means both the male and female flowers or cones are on the same part of the tree but different parts. So you'll find, so again, for example, you tend to find, so here we've got tons and tons of male cones all over the tree. But again, they are at specific points of the tree. It's only the female flower / cones, and they're in a much smaller amount, and they're typically pushed towards the very tips of the branches of the tree. As I said, if this happened a little bit later, you might have been lucky to see the pinky red female cone, but it's just a fraction too early. Come in here, we can pull this back. I mean, that's quite a nice younger female cone, so that's probably from last year. I don't know where the others have gone, but it's amazing, isn't it, how this will turn into beautiful. And again, over time they'll open up and release tiny little seeds inside. Anyway, I think we're pretty much done here. So that's that Monterey pine at St Thomas Pleasure Grounds. As I said, there's nothing more I can do, unfortunately. I just wanted to do a quick video showing this lovely tree. Let's step back. At an angle where against the sky you can actually see the cone silhouette. But to get to the very young female cones is going to be very difficult. They're just finalising this now. You can see the mature female cone on this particularly large branch that unfortunately has completely been severed from the tree due to the recent storm. Fantastic tree. hopefully, even though it's suffered, you know, this, well, intense damage, shouldn't cause any risk of the tree having to be removed at all, as long as the root plate is pretty solid, because we did have a Monterey pine at Exeter cemetery a few years ago, which there was a storm, and it wasn't even as bad as this storm, and the pine tree was probably a fraction bigger than this one, and unfortunately the storm was enough to basically knock it out of its root plate, and it was a complete failure, whereas this is just a partial failure of 2 large branches. It's great when you can get to see all parts of the tree that you always normally be able to do so easily. It's just such a shame that that's the problem with storm damage, isn't it? A lot of trees take a walloping, and even worse when they fall down. Anyway, it could be a lot worse. I've checked the rest of the park and I didn't notice anything, any other major problems. It was just this one tree that had suffered damage. So I'll take a walk back and you can then see the tree from a distance. And there we go, the Monterey pine of St Thomas Pleasure Ground, which survived the storm but did take some damage. Well, I hope you found this useful. As I said, sorry if I've made any mistakes. I only came here just to have a general walk around. I wasn't expecting to see the damage here, so I thought I'd better get this recorded. Well, thanks for watching.